to know this good shepherd Jesus more and got to know the sheep, right? Got to know each other a little bit better. Volunteers talking together, kids talking together. There's one participant in this year's VBS that I did not appreciate. It was the house cat. They kept trying to get in, and he got in a number of times. He needed a real shepherd. Anyway, I'm glad you're here today. This is such a fun week. I know that there are volunteers that aren't here. They're in the ER at Gretna, getting IV and oxygen and all that fun stuff. No, it's exhausting, but it's a good work. You know, serving the Lord is a good work, or, just doing good things for others. It's just, God has designed us to serve one another, and we are blessed when we do that, especially when it comes to advancing His kingdom. And so, God is our shepherd, and we shall not want, right? Sounds good on paper, but life has its challenges, doesn't it? And many people love Psalm 23 until real life happens, and then the promises of the psalm collide with the pain, the disappointment, the fear, the unanswered questions. So I'm going to go real spiritual, real heavy, real fast with a Clint Eastwood clip. Actually, not a clip, I can't show the clip, but and some of you don't know who Clint Eastwood is, which really burdens my heart. One of my favorite movies of Clint Eastwood, Pale Rider, is filled with scripture, and the movie starts out with Megan. Megan is praying Psalms 23, but she adds in some words that reflect the pain of life. See, she is dealing with these bandits, these guys that are trying to push her family out of being panners for gold, in this mining community, and they have killed her dog, and she's brokenhearted. So she's praying the Lord's Prayer in her own words. She says, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want, but I do want. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restored my soul, but they killed my dog. Yea, that I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, but I am afraid. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me, but I need a miracle. Thy loving kindness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, if you exist, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever, but I'd like to get more out of this life first." That's Psalms 23. We probably all felt that way at different times. We know God's promises. We know Jesus is real, but we have these doubts, and doubts are okay. Actually, and I often say this, is that faith requires doubt. Faith requires doubt. If everything is known in facts, then it's no longer faith. It's just what we know. But faith has this element of not knowing everything, and that's where trust comes in. And so to know the shepherd does not mean that our lives will be without hardship or grief. Everybody has hardship and grief. But it does mean that God will not abandon us. And so even when it feels like we are in want, we can trust that we have a good shepherd to see us through. So without a good shepherd, we have no hope. We have no hope without a good shepherd. And the statistics remind us just how desperately our culture, our people, our neighborhoods, our family needs a good shepherd. More than 22% of children are currently receiving therapy, and nearly 40% of all high school students report persistent feelings of sadness or depression or hopelessness. Many are carrying burdens far beyond their years: substance abuse in the home, family instability, parental incarceration, neighborhood violence, unmet basic needs. And then add on top of that the social pressures of social media, complicated relationships, troubling world events, and it's no wonder that many young people are asking, where do I turn? And that's why it's so important, to have a VBS where we're trying to deeply plant this seed of faith and asking God to give increase to it. And so it's not just young people that have problems like this. It's older people too. 1 in 20 adults regularly report feelings of depression. Beneath the smiles and the achievements and the trophies, people are weary and anxious and searching for something solid to hold on to. But honestly, I don't need any kind of statistics to tell me that I need a good shepherd. I only need to look at my own self. I need just to look inward at this sheep and know that I need a shepherd. Because if it were not for my relationship with Jesus, the enemy would have already taken me out. Again and again, I was confused. I was weary, afraid, headed in the wrong direction, but I had a good shepherd who led me back to paths of righteousness. And Jesus has guided me and restored me. And I know that many of you, maybe all of you, maybe those even watching online can say, I know I have a good shepherd. And so this is why Psalms 23 continues to resonate with people, thousands of people, millions of people over years and years and years, because David wrote it and he knew and he lived it out. Sadly, oftentimes this psalm gets pushed to a funeral service. But really the psalm is a strategy for life, not just something to say at a funeral, which is appropriate. But it is really a strategy for life. So deep down, we all know this truth. We need a good shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. The question here I want you to think about is, am I following the shepherd, or am I still trying to be my own shepherd? See, David doesn't begin with green grass. He begins with a relationship, the word my. And so the Lord is my shepherd. And that little word my is huge in this psalm. It's key to the whole psalm. Jesus knows us individually by name, and we listen to him because we know his voice, you see, because he's my shepherd. And so during VBS, we've asked, we had all the children had a leader, maybe multiple leaders. Depends how active that child was, right? And so as that child would be led through VBS, they would be going from station to class to wherever. And if the child would have said, I'm going my own way, that would not have gone well with them, right? Because they would have missed a class or an activity, or more importantly, a snack, right? Missed snack time. And so many people, you see, this illustrates how many people, they want God's provision, but they don't want his leadership. They want what God can do for them, but they're not really concerned with following him. And so the question is not, do I want God's blessings? The question really is, am I willing to follow the shepherd? Right? Is he your shepherd? Is he my shepherd? You might be trying to be your own shepherd if you make plans and then ask God to bless them. You might be trying to be your own shepherd if you trust your feelings more than God's word. You might be trying to be your own shepherd if you insist on being in control of every process and the outcome. You might be trying to be your own shepherd if you constantly worry about the future as though everything depends upon you. And so, have you confessed Jesus as your good shepherd? Have you made that publicly known? Is that part of your conversations with others? When you're making plans, when you're talking about the future, is Jesus your shepherd? Have you been baptized? Have you died to self and been raised to walk behind the shepherd, right? In the cyber world, when we talk about following, I don't know if any of you all do this, but I follow a lot of YouTubers, especially when they show me how to fix a lawnmower or whatever, I click and subscribe and all that. And in the cyber world, this term follow is a big deal. Following refers to this act of subscribing to a channel or a podcast, to get the latest updated information, and you get that in your feed, and there are new videos that are uploaded, and that's how you stay connected to the Creator. You're following them. Here comes another, blog or whatever that shows up. And so this is the way the Creator has of staying connected with us, by constantly wanting us to follow them. And if you don't have this app on your phone, you should, because when you get to the pearly gates, no. This app lets you know what's going on in the church. It has discipleship resources and all that kind of thing. But we have these apps, and we have these people that we follow through the cyber world, and it's really changed our culture. It's really changed how we operate throughout the day. It's said that we pick up our phones or touch our phones more than 100 times in a single day. More than 100 times, and I think that's probably right. And if we're not careful, Christians can unknowingly allow the phone to become their shepherd. And so this next video kind of illustrates how that happens. Listen to this.
My phone is my shepherd. I shall not be bored. It makes me lie down in endless scrolling. It leads me beside silent notifications. It refreshes my feed. It guides me in the paths of comparison for my image's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of low signal, I will fear no disconnection, for 5G is with me. Your charger and Wi-Fi, they comfort me. You prepare an email before me in the presence of my responsibilities. You anoint my head with blue light. My screen time overflows. Surely distraction and anxiety shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the glow of the glass screen forever.
It's a satire, but I mean, is there not truth in that? You know, our phones make excellent tools, but they are terrible shepherds. And here we are. We hear far too often about people, their lives being destroyed through their phones. And now with AI, ChatGPT or whatever you use, the AI impact to our world is bigger than the Industrial Revolution. It's going to change and is changing everything as we know it. And it will impact us. And AI offers advice and guidance to fixing your lawnmower or creating some new recipe. That's great. And so the danger is not in the technology that it exists. The danger is when we begin to look to it for wisdom, identity, relationship, direction, and comfort. And people are doing that. The AI is becoming the world's shepherd. And that's why we have to be so careful that the voices of our devices do not become louder than the voice of our shepherd. Everyone has a shepherd. Everyone does. You say, oh, I'm so independent. No, we're all following someone. And so the question is not whether you're being led. The question is who's leading you. And this is why. Now you listen, church. Listen up. This is important. That's why daily prayer and Bible reading and intentional periods away from our screens are no longer optional disciplines. They are essential practices for everyone who wants to be led by the Good Shepherd. We're going to have to be more disciplined in our life with the devices around us, or the devices will control us more than God will. That's just how it is. And so this isn't hard. This is not hard to do. So, you know, maybe you like to work in the garden, you work outside, or you're working in the garage, wherever it is, and you're like, man, this is one time I'm not going to have my phone near me. You know, this is, or you have planned time away, or you have a planned evening where the devices are off. You make a practice discipline, a regular thing where you're just quiet, and to be quiet with the Lord is optimal. That's good. Now, the Good Shepherd, he knows what his sheep need. And so this is a typical green pasture land in Palestine. No, it doesn't look very green, does it? I hate to blow up the VBS backdrop, but the shepherd leading the sheep is not what not these lush fields of alfalfa. See, Palestine's a very arid country. And the way it gets its moisture daily is that you have the dew that comes off the Mediterranean, and it collects around the rocks that are on the hillsides. And so the moisture, the dew, comes off the rock, and that is where the green grass grows up. And so the shepherd is leading their sheep from this little clump of grass to the next clump of grass, and that's the daily life of the sheep and the shepherd. And so the sheep's only chance for life is to depend upon the shepherd day by day. And so, if a sheep tries to be their own shepherd, they will wander into starvation quickly and die. And this is what David is leaning into. He's saying following Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is the only option for life. He's the only option for life. And that's one of the big truths that we should pull out of Psalm 23. And so the shepherd knows what the sheep need better than the sheep know themselves. You know, verse 2 and 3, he leads me to the green meadows, beside the peaceful streams. He renews my strength. Am I willing to trust the shepherd's wisdom over my own desires? And that's a big one. Like, am I going to put into practice what the shepherd is telling me to do? Now, King David, when he wrote Psalm 23, he paints this picture of a loving, caring, concerned shepherd, though David himself faced incredible hardship. Sometimes it was his own choices. Sometimes it was the choices of others. But he suffered greatly, but yet he was one of the most successful kings of Israel. And he lived out Psalm 23. And so our good shepherd guides us to the peaceful stream, but he won't force us to drink. There was a show, Mythbusters, and they actually, would see if these myths that we have are true. Can you lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink? And that's true. You can't make the horse drink, right? You can lead him to the water, and the same way as with us, God can lead us to the place where we can find nourishment and for our soul and for our life, but you and I have a responsibility to take action to follow the shepherd's leading. And so in pop culture, the idea of dependence upon God to meet our deepest needs seems ridiculous. I'll meet my deepest needs. I'm the captain of my life. I know what I need. And the Lord's like, no, you don't. I created you. I sustained you. I know what's coming. You don't. You need to trust in me. And so God is going to meet our deepest needs. Seems ridiculous to some, but it is what the psalm is saying. And Psalm 23 says, if we follow the shepherd, he meets our need for relationship, purpose, provision, rest, restoration, guidance, protection, companionship, hope, and an eternal home. No human, not the best marriage, can meet that list of critical needs. Not AI, not a government program. Only the good shepherd can meet these types of needs. And so only the good shepherd, Jesus Christ, can lead us like a good parent. Like a healthy parent provides for their child. The child doesn't need just food on the table. A child needs to be loved, needs someone to guide him, guide her, protect them, encourage them, correct them, help them become the person they were created to be. A good parent gives relationship when the child feels alone, purpose when they feel confused, provision when they're hungry, rest when they're exhausted, restoration when they failed, guidance when they're lost, protection when they're afraid, companionship when they're hurting, hope when they feel discouraged, ultimately finding a home where that child belongs. This is what the Good Shepherd does. This is what Psalm 23 is saying, that God does all of that infinitely better than we could do ourselves. And so, ask a person who's lived life for a while in their 70s or their 80s or their 90s or even beyond that, ask them what was the most important thing in life, and they're not going to tell you a bigger television or a new truck or a big paycheck. What they're going to talk about is that they had people that loved them and they loved. They had meaningful work in life. They had purpose in their life, that God's provision met them in their deepest, darkest times and gave them forgiveness when they needed it, protection throughout dangerous moments, or friends. They had someone who walked with them through grief and gave them hope. In other words, they'll describe the very things David is talking about in Psalms 23. Isn't it interesting that Psalms 23 is a strategy for life? The shepherd meets our needs. The promise of Psalm 23 is not the absence of the valleys, but the presence of the shepherd. And so in verse 4 and 5, even when I walk through the darkest valleys, I will not be afraid, for you are beside me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. So, the thing that we have to be careful of is, do I get more focused on the valley I'm in or the shepherd who is with me? And that's an easy thing to have happen, where there's some tragedy in our life, some trial in our life, and we just become fixated on the problem. Just focusing on what is amiss or what's broken or who's passed away. Like, we just get fixed on that. And the Psalm 23 says, don't focus on the valley, focus on the shepherd who's leading. And this testimony that Michelle has given us will remind us that God is with us even in the darkest valleys.
So we've been talking about Psalm 23. We spent all of VBS week talking about it, and I had an opportunity to share with the kids my dark shadow time when my oldest son Dimitri was in a car accident and he passed away. That was 4 years ago, and I remember that day, that night. Well, that day God surrounded me by friends who loved me, but that night something very unexpected happened that made Psalm 23 come alive for me. One of the friends who was there with me when I received the news, she went home and she prepared a giant feast. And there was so much food. She came back and it was just for me. And she set it on my dining room table, and it was in some of the most beautiful dishes I've ever seen, and it tasted amazing. I didn't want to eat, but I decided I knew I needed to eat, and so I ate, and the food was delicious, and there was warm cake and different meats, and it was really just this huge picture of the Lord setting a table for me in the presence of my enemy, which at that time was death. And but I knew that the Lord was with me, and then after, in the days that followed, I received tons of cards, especially from the Kingdom kids, just telling me that they loved me and that they were praying for me. And it was really like the oil that the Lord was pouring on me, and my cup was overflowing with joy as I was just receiving the love from my church family, kids and adults. And then too, God gave me an opportunity. About a year later, I was in a church in a different state, and a young family had a miscarriage. And I remembered, I thought back on that table, and so I was able to give that to them and minister to them in that. And it was really neat to be able to share in that. So God is definitely my shepherd and has been with me through the hardest seasons of my life and the good seasons, and I trust in his promises for the future. So, thank you.
Many of you were here when Dimitri died suddenly in a car accident, and how devastated Michelle was, how we were all devastated. And many of you also have lost loved ones. You've lost your young children. You've lost your mates. You've went through, as she described it, the worst enemy, death. But the Lord is with us. And what you need to think about in that video is that the Lord shepherded her with the people that were around her. Hannah was the one who brought her that meal that night. And I know some people treat church as just something they do at the end or the beginning of the week, however you think about that. But that is not what God intended his church to be. We are the hands and the feet of Jesus. And if you've ever read the Bible, you'll notice that God uses people to carry out his will. And that's why it's so important that we have our ear to the rail of people's lives where we can hear what they're going through and they can know what we're going through. We need these relationships because when the dark valleys come, and they will come, we need a good shepherd. And God uses his church to be that shepherd. Hopefully, you've had that experience where you've seen God work through his church to shepherd people. And God is leading. There's an image that has stuck with me for decades. It was a story I heard about a preacher who was on a tour in the Middle East, Palestine area, the Holy Lands. And they were on this bus, and the bus had to stop because these sheep were coming across the road, And so they stopped, and the shepherd thought was a shepherd. The guy was behind the flock, you see. And so one of the guys on the bus said to the guide, hey, why is the shepherd behind them? I thought the shepherd leads the sheep. And the tour guide said, that's not a shepherd. That's the butcher. He's driving them to market to be slaughtered. And that is a clear illustration of the contrast of Satan and God. Satan will drive us through our weaknesses, through our sins, through our guilt or shame or our failure. He will drive us to our death. And then there's the Good Shepherd who's leading through the dark valleys, who's leading to the places of nourishment. But we have to choose to follow. We have to choose to follow. Tim Keller says, because Jesus came and had to thirst, our cup can be filled. Because he was hungry, we can feast. And because he was forsaken, grace and mercy will follow us all the days of our lives. That's why we can trust, because of Jesus. See, Jesus, he lived out to be the Good Shepherd. And the Good Shepherd did something David could only anticipate, that the Good Shepherd entered and faced death itself. He laid down his life for the sheep and he rose again. And Psalm 23 begins with a shepherd, but it ends with a home. It begins with the shepherd, but it ends with a home. And so Psalm 23 teaches us, if you have a shepherd, you have everything you truly need. I know that's a big claim, but I'm not making it. Jesus is. He says, I'm what you need. Provision for today, strength for the journey, and the hope we need for eternity. And so can you truly say, Jesus is my good shepherd? Am I willing to trust his wisdom over my own feelings? Am I more focused on the shepherd and not the valley that I'm walking through, you see? And so as we move to this next part of our service, we're coming to the Lord's table that Jesus has prepared for us. And he prepared that table originally in the presence of his enemy, our enemy, Satan. And he invites us to eat and drink with him, to be with him.
Thank you for joining us today. If you feel like God spoke to you today and you would like to discuss your next right step with God, please visit cornerstonechatham.org, scroll to the bottom of the homepage, and fill out the form to connect with us. We hope you enjoyed being with us today, and we look forward to seeing how God is working around Cornerstone in person and online.